darkened reels, whispered rumors, shadowy cinemas where censors once trembled. The 1980s wasn't just the golden age of excess. It was also the decade when European horror pushed boundaries America couldn't stomach. Films were seized, banned, or whispered about like contraband. But what made them so dangerous? Tonight, we'll journey into forbidden celluloid, 15 European nightmares too shocking for American screens. Number 15. Anthropophagus, 1980. When Italian director Joe D'Amato unleashed Anthropophagus, also known as The Grim Reaper, in 1980, it immediately earned a reputation as one of Europe's most stomach-churning horror films. The plot is deceptively simple. A group of tourists stranded on a remote Greek island discover the ruins of a cursed family and a cannibalistic madman lurking in the shadows. But what shocked audiences wasn't the setting. It was the graphic imagery that followed. The film's infamous centerpiece shows a pregnant woman's unborn child being devoured by the killer. Critics gasped, audiences fled, and British authorities quickly seized the movie under the notorious video nasty panic. America was no kinder. Distribution was stalled, theaters refused to screen it, and even grindhouse markets hesitated. Some whispered that even seasoned horror fans felt ill watching it. Behind the scenes, D'Amato reveled in controversy. He pushed his crew to create practical gore effects, so realistic that some believed real corpses had been used. Rumors swirled about the cast refusing to watch the finished cut. Censors in multiple countries demanded edits, but D'Amato famously bragged that the scandal only fueled sales. Over time, Anthropophagus vanished from official circulation, surviving only in bootleg VHS tapes swapped among collectors. But in later decades, the very same scenes that once triggered bans cemented its cult status. Today, horror fans revere it as one of the most extreme Italian shockers ever filmed. The legacy? Anthropophagus proved that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural. They're human appetites unleashed. And for America, that truth was simply too grotesque to allow. Number 14. The Beyond, 1981. Lucio Fulci was already infamous as the godfather of gore, but when he released The Beyond in 1981, even hardened censors recoiled. Set in Louisiana, but filmed with the unmistakable dreamlike surrealism of Italian horror, the story follows a woman who inherits a cursed hotel built atop one of the 7 gates of hell. What begins as gothic atmosphere quickly dissolves into nightmarish tableau of maggots, melting flesh, and blood-soaked visions. In Europe, audiences celebrated its artistry. In America, however, distributors panicked. The Motion Picture Association deemed it too violent for mainstream release, demanding severe cuts that gutted Fulci's original vision. Many theaters refused to screen it altogether. For years, U.S. audiences only saw a heavily censored version retitled 7 Doors of Death. The original masterpiece remained buried overseas. Behind the curtain, Fulci battled both studios and critics. His crew recalled working under near-chaotic conditions, where sets often flooded with animals. Real tarantulas were used in the infamous eye-gouging scene. Actors later admitted they barely understood the fragmented script, but trusted Fulci's hypnotic imagery to carry the story. Critics in America dismissed it as incoherent trash, yet the suppression only deepened its legend. In the 90s, uncut prints smuggled from Europe began circulating at midnight screenings. Horror magazines declared it a lost masterpiece, and today it is hailed as part of Fulci's Gates of Hell trilogy. What was once banned for incoherence and gore now stands as surrealist art. The story of The Beyond reminds us that horror isn't just about fear. It's about the imagination unleashed. For censors, that imagination felt like chaos. For fans, it felt like freedom. Number 13. Possession, 1981. When Andrzej Żuławski's Possession premiered in 1981, critics and audiences didn't know whether to call it horror, surreal drama, or outright madness. Starring Isabelle Adjani and Sam Neill, the story follows a crumbling marriage in Cold War Berlin. But what begins as a tale of infidelity descends into psychosis, body horror, and an infamous subway scene that critics described as cinema's most disturbing breakdown. In Europe, it polarized viewers. In France, Adjani won Best Actress at Cannes, though she later confessed the role nearly destroyed her sanity. In Britain, however, the film was immediately targeted during the video nasty purge. The hallucinatory blend of religious imagery, sexuality, and grotesque creature effects was deemed unfit for release. In the United States, distributors hacked nearly half an hour from the runtime, stripping the film of its surreal rhythm and rendering it almost incoherent. Behind the scenes, Żuławski reportedly clashed with producers who begged him to tone down his vision. He refused. The special effects, created by Carlo Rambaldi, the same artist behind E.T. and Alien, shocked even seasoned technicians. Some whispered that Adjani suffered a nervous collapse after filming her subway convulsion scene, though she later admitted it took her years to emotionally recover. For decades, Possession was buried under censorship cuts and banned reels. Yet it gained a strange afterlife on bootlegs, with horror fans whispering about the uncut version as though it were forbidden scripture. Today, restored in pristine quality, the film is praised as one of the most daring European horrors of its decade. What censors saw as chaos and obscenity, history now sees as art. And that's the paradox of Possession. Banned for its extremity, remembered, owed for its genius. Number 12, Cannibal Holocaust. 1981. If Cannibal Holocaust set the blueprint for Italian jungle shockers, Umberto Lenzi's Cannibal Holocaust in 1981 pushed it even further, and was marketed with the chilling tagline, "Banned in 31 countries." The film follows 3 students traveling to South America, only to encounter drug dealers, tribal warfare, and scenes of torture that blended staged effects with too much realism for comfort. Upon release, it was instantly labeled a video nasty in Britain, where authorities seized copies in raids. In America, the MPAA demanded so many cuts that the movie was nearly unrecognizable, while underground distributors advertised the uncut version as the most violent movie ever made. Audiences whispered that it was too disturbing to finish. Behind the camera, Lenzi leaned into controversy, bragging that his film was more savage than Cannibal Holocaust. Yet this bravado came at a cost. Critics lambasted it as tasteless exploitation, and animal rights groups condemned the real animal killings used on screen. Cast members later admitted they were pressured into scenes they didn't understand until they saw the final cut. Still, censorship only made it stronger. While mainstream theaters rejected it, grindhouse cinemas in New York and Los Angeles packed with curious viewers who wanted to see what was too shocking for others. On VHS, it became a collector's grail, passed from hand to hand like forbidden contraband. Today, Cannibal Holocaust remains divisive, dismissed by some as sleaze, celebrated by others as a crucial piece of horror history. But its banning proved one thing. In the 1980s, fear wasn't just on the screen, it was in the panic of what audiences might do once they watched. Number 11. The House by the Cemetery, 1981. Lucio Fulci strikes again. By the time The House by the Cemetery arrived in 1981, Fulci had already enraged censors with Zombie and the Beyond. This gothic nightmare centered on a family moving into a New England home with a dark secret lurking in its basement. The premise echoed classic haunted house tales, but Fulci injected it with mutilations, dismemberments, and dreamlike editing that baffled mainstream viewers. In Britain, it was quickly banned as a video nasty. Authorities cited unrelenting gore and lingering sadism, particularly the scenes involving children in danger. In the United States, it was released only in heavily cut versions, stripped of its most grotesque flourishes. Distributors were so nervous, they often rebranded it under alternate titles, hoping to slip past censor boards. Behind the curtain, the production was chaotic. Fulci's reputation as a tyrannical perfectionist grew. Actors complained of grueling shoots and confusing direction. Even the special effects team admitted that Fulci demanded more blood, more entrails, more chaos. Critics dismissed the movie as incoherent trash, but audiences who managed to find uncut screenings celebrated its atmosphere, its sense of dread, and its refusal to play by horror's rules. Over time, The House by the Cemetery became one of Fulci's most studied works, rediscovered in film festivals and restored Blu-ray editions. The same nightmare imagery that once triggered bans is now praised for its artistry and surrealism. And so, the film stands as a reminder. What censors call dangerous often hides a vision the world isn't ready for. In Fulci's basement of horrors, America saw corruption. Fans saw poetry. Number 10. Tenebrae, 1982. Dario Argento's Tenebrae arrived in 1982 with high expectations. The Italian master of giallo thrillers was at the peak of his fame, and this film was meant to be his most stylish murder mystery yet. The story followed an American author in Rome, whose latest novel inspires a brutal string of murders. Sleek, modern, and drenched in crimson, it was hailed in Europe as one of Argento's boldest works. But in America, it was another story. Censors recoiled at the elaborate death sequences, especially one infamous double murder shot in a continuous operatic camera movement. Critics accused Argento of glorifying violence against women. British authorities banned it as part of the video Nasty Panic, with tabloids branding it depraved art masquerading as cinema. Behind the scenes, Argento himself was battling obsession. He admitted that Tenebrae was partly autobiographical, born from his frustration with critics who attacked his work as dangerous. On set, his perfectionism pushed crews to exhaustion, yet the results were undeniable. Bold architecture, sweeping Steadicam shots, and a visual style that influenced directors for decades. For years, American audiences could only see Tenebrae in butchered, heavily censored versions retitled Unsane. But horror fans whispered about the uncut European cut, an entirely different film, pulsating with Argento's hypnotic rhythms. By the 90s, film festivals and cult VHS distributors resurrected the true version. Today, Tenebrae is considered one of Argento's masterpieces, a meta-horror about the relationship between violence, art, and censorship itself. Ironically, the very act of banning it only amplified its themes. The film wasn't just about murder, it was about who controls the story. Number 9. Stage Fright, 1987. By the late 1980s, Italian horror was evolving into slicker, more experimental territory. Michele Soavi's Stage Fright, also known as Deliria, burst onto the scene in 1987 as a slasher with an operatic twist. The premise? A theater troupe rehearsing a play becomes trapped inside with a masked killer who stalks them one by one. The weapon of choice? A giant owl mask that turns surreal imagery into pure terror. In Europe, it became a cult sensation. But in America, distributors were uneasy. The movie was condemned for its relentless violence. Actors mutilated with chainsaws, axes, and drills, all staged in the confined setting of a theater. Critics branded it exploitative, and censorship boards balked at the escalating brutality. Some U.S. states refused to screen it, while others demanded entire sequences be cut. Behind the curtain, Soavi, once a protege of Dario Argento, pushed his cast and crew to embrace both horror and artistry. The result was a movie that balanced gory spectacle with surreal staging, often compared to a fever dream of Argento mixed with Hitchcock. Audiences in Europe praised its inventiveness, but American critics dismissed it as too excessive for mainstream release. Over time, Stage Fright disappeared from official circulation in the U.S., surviving only through bootleg VHS copies cherished by collectors. Yet its reputation grew, especially among young filmmakers inspired by its daring camera work and surreal visuals. Today, it's celebrated as one of the most underrated slashers of the decade, a film that was banned not because it lacked art, but because its art was too violent for American tastes. Number 8. Phenomena, 1985. Dario Argento returned again in 1985 with Phenomena, a strange, dreamlike blend of horror, fairy tale, and supernatural mystery. Starring a young Jennifer Connelly in one of her first roles, the story follows a girl who can telepathically communicate with insects. Sent to a Swiss boarding school plagued by murders, she teams up with a wheelchair-bound entomologist played by Donald Pleasance. The result? A bizarre mix of beauty and grotesque horror. In Europe, audiences embraced its surreal quality, but in America, censors had other plans. The movie was retitled Creepers and hacked down by nearly 30 minutes, erasing much of its atmosphere. What remained was confusing and disjointed. Critics dismissed it as incoherent nonsense, but whispers spread among horror fans that the uncut European version was an entirely different film, a hallucinatory nightmare with some of Argento's most striking imagery. Behind the scenes, the production was troubled. Argento clashed with producers over the film's length and bizarre tone. Connolly, only 15 at the time, endured grueling shoots, including scenes with swarms of real insects. Crew members recalled that Fulci-like levels of chaos unfolded on set, with Argento pushing for extremes no one else dared. For decades, the U.S. only knew phenomena in its mutilated form, but as DVD and Blu-ray restorations emerged, fans finally experienced its full glory, complete with its strange rock soundtrack featuring Iron Maiden and Motorhead. What once was censored as incoherent trash is now celebrated as one of Argento's boldest experiments. Phenomena proved a strange truth. Sometimes the most haunting nightmares are the ones that don't make sense, and that's exactly why censors feared them. Number 7. Santa Sangre, 1989. Alejandro Jodorowsky's Santa Sangre was never an ordinary horror film. It was an operatic fever dream. Released in 1989, the Mexican-Chilean surrealist partnered with Italian producers to craft a film so strange, so violent, and so poetic that audiences didn't know what to make of it. The story follows a young circus performer traumatized by his domineering mother, religious cults, and grotesque murders carried out with her dismembered arms. In Europe, critics marveled at its artistry, but in America, distributors hesitated. The film's mix of religious imagery, graphic violence, and surrealism sparked fears of blasphemy. Some theaters refused to book it, and censors demanded cuts. Whispers spread that Jodorowsky's vision was unfilmable for American audiences. Behind the curtain, the production was just as chaotic as the film itself. Jodorowsky used his own children in lead roles, creating an atmosphere of real familial tension on set. Crew members later admitted they barely understood what they were filming. Critics were split. Some hailed it as genius, others condemned it as madness. In America, the film received only a limited release, heavily cut and shrouded in controversy. For years, it existed as a whispered legend, a film critics dared to call one of the strangest horror experiences ever made. On VHS, it became a cult treasure. Today, Santa Sangre is celebrated as a surrealist masterpiece, studied in film schools and embraced by horror fans for its bold vision. What was once too bizarre, too offensive, too grotesque for America, is now a shining example of horror as art. Jodorowsky proved that sometimes nightmares are just another language for truth. Number 6. Enigma, 1987. When Lucio Fulci directed Enigma in 1987, it seemed at first like a simple revenge story. The plot: a shy, bullied girl at a Catholic school falls into a coma after a cruel prank. But her spirit lingers, haunting her tormentors with supernatural punishments that grow more gruesome with each death. European audiences saw it as Fulci's strange fusion of Carrie and phenomena. But in America, the reaction was different. Distributors dismissed it as exploitative trash, while censors targeted its grotesque imagery, particularly a notorious death scene where a character is suffocated by a writhing swarm of snails. Rumors spread that theaters refused to screen it, claiming the imagery was indecent. Behind the scenes, Fulci's health was declining, but his obsession with pushing horror boundaries remained. The production suffered from budget constraints, with rushed effects and exhausted actors. Even his crew admitted the movie felt cursed. Critics panned it as incoherent, yet in Europe, uncut versions circulated freely, while American audiences only saw heavily butchered VHS releases. Over time, Enigma disappeared into obscurity, dismissed as one of Fulci's weaker efforts, but horror collectors resurrected it decades later, praising its dreamlike atmosphere and surreal imagery. Today, it is re-evaluated as a fascinating artifact of Fulci's twilight years, banned not for its quality, but because America couldn't stomach its grotesque vision of revenge. Sometimes, horror doesn't need coherence. It just needs to unsettle, and Enigma unsettled so deeply that censors preferred to bury it. Number 5. Opera, 1987. Dario Argento's opera may be his most visually dazzling and most cursed film. Released in 1987, it told the story of a young opera singer haunted by a masked killer who forces her to witness brutal murders. The killer's method was unforgettable, taping needles beneath her eyelids so she could not look away. European audiences were enthralled, but American distributors were horrified. The MPAA demanded sweeping cuts to its most violent sequences, arguing that the eye needle imagery was too sadistic. Some theaters outright refused to screen it, and the film's U.S. release was drastically delayed. Critics in America branded it perverse spectacle. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Argento clashed with producers over budget overruns. The lead actress, Christina Marciach, was reportedly traumatized by Argento's demands, forced to endure hours of grueling shoots with taped prosthetics near her eyes. To make matters worse, Argento himself was injured on set, and rumors circulated of mysterious accidents plaguing the production. Despite the bans, the film developed a cult following. Fans whispered about the uncut version, where Argento's artistry blended with shocking violence. Bootleg tapes circulated in horror circles, keeping its legend alive. Over time, restorations revealed the movie's dazzling cinematography and haunting opera sequences. Today, opera is praised as one of Argento's most ambitious works, an audacious marriage of beauty and brutality. Yet, its banning proved a simple truth. America wasn't ready for art that demanded its audiences stare into horror without blinking. Number 4. City of the Living Dead, 1980. Lucio Fulci's City of the Living Dead, also known as The Gates of Hell, was released in 1980 as the first part of his apocalyptic trilogy. The story begins when a priest's suicide in a small town unleashes supernatural forces, opening the gates of hell itself. What followed wasn't just horror, it was an onslaught of grotesque visions. Bodies vomiting intestines, heads drilled open, and corpses rising from the earth. European audiences were accustomed to Fulci's extremes, but American distributors balked. The MPAA demanded massive edits, leaving a butchered version that stripped away Fulci's hallucinatory pacing. Critics called it incoherent, while others accused it of being immoral. In Britain, it was quickly added to the video nasty list, seized in raids, and condemned in tabloids. Behind the camera, Fulci pushed his crew to create some of the most realistic gore effects ever attempted at the time. Cast members later admitted they were disturbed by the level of violence. Rumors swirled that even hardened horror fans fainted during screenings. For years, the film remained a cult secret in America, available only in censored VHS versions. But among collectors, uncut prints circulated like contraband, cementing its reputation as one of Fulci's most terrifying visions. Today, it stands as a landmark in European horror, banned, ridiculed, yet ultimately vindicated. Fulci's message was clear. If hell existed, it wasn't a metaphor, and that made censors deeply uncomfortable. Number 3. Demons, 1985. Lamberto Bava's Demons, produced by Dario Argento, was one of the decade's most energetic and terrifying Italian horror films. Released in 1985, it told the story of a cursed movie screening where the audience is transformed into flesh-eating demons. Soon, the theater becomes a trap, art and reality merging into one blood-soaked nightmare. European audiences cheered its inventiveness. But in America, censors were alarmed. The MPAA slashed its runtime, cutting scenes of gouged throats, blood-drenched rampages, and grotesque transformations. Critics dismissed it as mindless gore. Others whispered that it was dangerous to release a film where the act of watching a movie itself became a death sentence. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic but exhilarating. Bava, following in his father's footsteps, embraced Argento's flair for spectacle. Cast members recalled endless nights shooting in claustrophobic theater sets drenched in fake blood. The soundtrack, featuring heavy metal bands like Mötley Crüe, only amplified the chaos. In America, the censored cut robbed it of much of its impact. Yet fans who discovered the uncut European version were blown away. VHS bootlegs spread across horror conventions, and Demons soon gained a cult following. Today it is hailed as one of the quintessential Italian horror experiences of the 1980s. Its banning was ironic. Demons was itself a movie about censorship, about what happens when horror leaps off the screen. For American censors, that metaphor cut too close to reality. Number 2. Cannibal Holocaust. 1980, Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust remains one of the most infamous films ever made. Released in 1980, it was marketed as the most controversial movie of all time. The story follows a documentary crew who vanish in the Amazon jungle. What rescuers later find, footage of the crew exploiting, tormenting, and ultimately falling victim to a tribe, is presented with such realism that many believed it was authentic. In Europe, the film was banned in multiple countries. In America, censors condemned its violence, especially the real animal killings captured on film. Deodato was even arrested in Italy and forced to prove that his actors were still alive, after rumors circulated that the murders were real. Behind the scenes, the production was brutal. Actors endured harsh jungle conditions, while Deodato pushed his crew to extremes. The decision to kill animals on screen made it notorious worldwide. Critics branded it obscene, immoral, unfit for civilized audiences. But horror fans whispered that it was a masterpiece of found footage long before the genre existed. For decades, America only saw heavily censored versions. Yet bootleggers ensured the uncut print spread underground, cementing its reputation. Today, it is studied both as horror cinema and as a commentary on exploitation itself. Cannibal Holocaust wasn't just banned, it was feared, and that fear made it immortal. Number 1. Suspiria, 1977. Banned into the 80s. Though technically released in 1977, Dario Argento's Suspiria faced its most intense censorship battles during the 1980s, when uncut restorations attempted to circulate in America. This hallucinatory tale of a ballet academy run by witches was drenched in neon color, surreal sound design, and shocking violence. By the 80s, European restorations preserved Argento's vision, but in the US, the MPAA cracked down harder than ever. American distributors hacked away entire scenes. The infamous barbed wire sequence, the dog attack, the brutal stabbing. The result was a neutered version that critics dismissed as incoherent. The original was banned from many mainstream theaters, with whispers that it was too artistic for exploitation, too violent for art. Behind the scenes, Suspiria was a nightmare to film. Argento demanded surreal lighting schemes, while Goblin's pounding score blared on, set to unsettle actors. Jessica Harper, the star, admitted she never fully understood the story, but she could feel its hypnotic terror. Crew members recalled nights of endless takes under hot, blinding lights. By the mid-80s, horror fans in America were desperate to see the uncut version. Bootleg tapes from Europe circulated secretly, while horror magazines breathlessly described the forbidden cut. Festivals began showing smuggled prints, often risking legal action. When the full version finally resurfaced decades later in remastered glory, audiences realized why it had been suppressed. Suspiria wasn't just horror, it was horror as art. Too vivid, too surreal, too uncompromising. And that's why it earns the number 1 spot. More than any other banned European horror of the 80s, Suspiria showed that what America feared most wasn't gore, it was beauty wrapped in terror. 15 films, each banned, butchered, or buried. Yet every one of them survived, passed hand to hand, whispered about in midnight screenings, reborn as cult legends. What does it say about us that the movies we tried hardest to kill became the ones we remember most? Which of these forbidden nightmares would you dare to watch? Like, subscribe, and tell us below.